With the death of Theodore McCarrick, one of the darkest chapters in the recent history of the Catholic Church has closed, at least officially. But those who hoped that with him, the system that protected him would also disappear may be disappointed. The network of power that enabled his abuses has not disappeared. It has simply recomposed itself. Some of his protégés still sit at the top of the ecclesiastical hierarchy today. And among the questions that have never really been resolved, one remains that continues to burn. How much did Pope Francis know? And since when? In this video, we retrace what many avoid talking about, because not everything ended with McCarrick. On the contrary, with the death of former Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, which occurred last Thursday at the age of 94, one of the darkest and most scandalous chapters in the recent history of the Church formally closes. A central figure in numerous scandals, McCarrick had for decades exercised considerable influence, both ecclesiastically and politically. Despite his dismissal and removal from public life, his impact will presumably continue to be felt for a long time to come, especially through those prelates who were ordained or promoted through his intercession and who today occupy prominent positions in the ecclesiastical hierarchy. Interestingly, the reporting on his death has been marked by a certain sobriety. Even publications that are generally inclined to a more explicit and critical narrative, such as America Magazine and the National Catholic Reporter, have maintained a restrained tone. In some cases, we observed the repetition of elements already present in the so-called McCarrick Report, without, however, offering further critical insights or substantial updates. One might hypothesize that such editorial caution is the result of the sensitivity that the topic continues to arouse within and outside the ecclesial community. To fully understand the scope of the McCarrick case and the nature of the controversy that has emerged in recent years, it is necessary to go back to the summer of 2018. Around that time, Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano, former apostolic nuncio to the United States, published a 10-page document that would ignite heated debate within the Church and beyond. In this testimony, made public without mediation, the former Vatican diplomat affirmed that Pope Francis had been informed of the improper conduct of the then Cardinal McCarrick, but had chosen not to intervene, indeed, revoking some restrictions imposed by his predecessor, Benedict XVI. The letter, which many called an unprecedented act in the recent history of ecclesiastical diplomacy, raised questions not only about the figure of McCarrick, but also about the internal dynamics of the Roman Curia and the actual will of the Holy See to address certain situations with transparency. The official reaction came about 2 years later, with the publication of the McCarrick Report, a Vatican dossier that attempted to reconstruct chronologically the facts and responsibilities. However, its reception was far from unanimous. Observers and commentators noted how the document tended to attribute primary blame to previous pontiffs, John Paul II and Benedict XVI, as well as to Vigano himself, while the current pontificate was presented in a decidedly more benevolent light. The discrepancy between the accusations made and the official narrative raised many questions, especially among the faithful who were most attentive to the dynamics of ecclesial transparency. In the context of the publication of the McCarrick Report, one element emerged that attracted particular attention: the image constructed around Pope Francis as a determined reformer, determined to eradicate abuse within the clergy. However, This representation has been the subject of critical analysis, especially in light of previous episodes involving other members of the clergy, which would seem to outline a less resolute attitude towards similar cases. Several observers have recalled, for example, how the current pontiff has handled some delicate situations, including that of the Slovenian priest Marko Rupnik. Despite serious accusations of a moral and spiritual nature, the religious man has long been protected by concrete measures, raising doubts about the effective application of the principle of zero tolerance. Similarly, the story of the then Argentine Bishop Gustavo Zanqueta is often cited. Despite being under investigation for alleged abuse, he was welcomed into the Vatican in an administrative role, away from prying eye. These episodes, combined with the McCarrick case, raise questions about the coherence and effectiveness of the strategy adopted by the Holy See in managing such serious situations. Ultimately, this is a question that cannot be dismissed with generalizations or reassuring slogans, but which requires a serious confrontation with the facts and with the ways in which, from time to time, the ecclesiastical authorities have reacted to accusations leveled against members of the clergy. The discrepancy between official statements and concrete actions remains for many an unresolved issue. The death of former Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, a central figure in one of the most serious scandals in the recent history of the American Church, has not closed the chapter that bears his name. On the contrary, his legacy continues to raise fears, divisions, and unresolved questions. The paradox is evident. While on the one hand, calls for transparency and ecclesial purification multiply, on the other, we witness the promotion and public valorization of figures whose moral integrity is, at the very least, the subject of debate. This is the case of Cardinal Robert McElroy, now Archbishop of Washington, who succeeded in the very seat that was the central theater of McCarrick's power. McElroy has been presented by newspapers, such as CNN, as an authoritative voice in the healing process of the Church, a point of reference in the protection of minors and victims. However, his own episcopal past has been marked by specific accusations. According to several testimonies, he ignored complaints regarding clerics suspected of abuse or improper conduct, failing to intervene promptly. Among the loudest voices questioning McElroy's moral credibility is Rachel Mastromarino, who claims that the current cardinal covered up for a priest who for months manipulated and abused her in ways described as ritualistic. The man, now dismissed from the clergy, was apparently defended and protected during the years in which McElroy held positions of responsibility. Mastromarino claims to have never received a single word from the cardinal, not even in private, and denounces the hypocrisy of a system that elevates to symbols of renewal those who in reality would have acted in continuity with the logic of the cover-up. The fact that, precisely on the occasion of McCarrick's death, the media chose to give space to McElroy's words as the official representative of the new American Church only reinforces the perception of a narrative line built more on political expediency than on the real conversion of structures. Thus, a few days after McCarrick's disappearance, one cannot help but observe how his influence, rather than having vanished, seems simply to have been transferred to new figures, equally compromised, but culturally more acceptable. In the whirlwind of reactions following McCarrick's death, one silence in particular was striking, that of those closest to Pope Francis. Voices usually active in commenting on every ecclesial dynamic have avoided any direct reference to the link between the Pope and the former cardinal, even though it is documented that Francis was informed of the accusations already in the first years of his pontificate. Alongside the Pope, figures appointed by him or closely trusted by him, such as Cardinals Tobin, Cupich and McElroy, appear today in central positions, despite doubts having emerged about their handling of similar cases. In this context, McCarrick's legacy seems less outdated than redistributed, reformulated in a way more compatible with the progressive image of the pontificate, but not necessarily more transparent. What do you think? If you liked the video, comment, Amen. God bless you.